usual, the things to remember are to sign the roll. So don't forget the roll, always important. We are privileged today. This is the last meeting of the semester, which is hard to believe. I mean, it's just hard to believe that here we are. I don't know about your life, but I'm sort of counting the days, and there aren't enough for some of the things that I need to be doing. So, but we'll have to make it work. But thanks for a great semester. It's been a good semester, I think, with church music, and I hope you've had good semesters personally. So lots of good things have happened, so thanks. We're really glad today to have three recent graduates, and we were talking as a faculty a while back, and we thought that it would be helpful if you could hear some of the things that happen around here that are helpful to people who are actually out in the field. Sometimes there's a tendency to do these kind of programs about everything I wish I'd learned and didn't. There's even some books like that, with those titles, assuming that, all the things you needed to learn, you certainly couldn't have learned in school. So we decided to just kind of spin this in a more positive way and ask these guys, what are the things you learned at Baylor that have been really helpful? And what kinds of things would you reiterate for students to learn, or maybe for us to teach, that are very, very helpful things. So we decided to kind of turn that conversation a little bit differently. So what we've asked our presenters today to do is to give an opening statement of a few minutes, and then we'll just have a conversation. We'll let them talk about maybe what they've heard each other say and have a little conversation there. And then we'll have some time for questions. So that's kind of our format. I'm always most excited when we have alums back. There's nothing that makes me happier than to have you guys back. I spent this weekend on Men's Choir Tour, a good bit of time with a student, Stephen Brought, who was here a number of years ago at Baylor. And I just can't tell you how invigorating it was for me to spend time with him in his ministry setting. It was interesting that he just had a birthday the day before we were there, and he was in his late 30s now, which was hard to believe that time is passing so quickly, for him at least. Anyway, that was fun. What I'm going to do is ask these guys to introduce themselves, and then we'll go back around and have your statement. So just let's start with Chris. Chris, tell us about when you were at Baylor, when you graduated, and where you are now. Well, and then we'll come back around.
I'm Chris Pillsbury. I was at Baylor from 2008 to 2012. I did the dual degree, MM in Div, and I'm serving at First Baptist Clifton.
And your undergrad is from Abilene?
Abilene Christian, yes.
And piano.
I'm Austin Daniel. I'm worship pastor at First Baptist Church in Salado, just down the road down I-35. I have an undergrad degree in music composition from Mary Hardin Baylor, used to be Baylor Female College. You know about the history there. And then graduated there in 06 and was here from 06 to 08, did a master's in church music.
I'm James Cheesman. I was at Baylor from 2008 to 2012. I did my undergrad church music piano emphasis, and then I went to Southwestern Baptist Seminary. I just graduated in May, and now I'm serving as the worship pastor at First Baptist Church in Farmersville, Texas.
James is the guy that you see on the new photo that was just put up out here last week.
With much longer hair.
Yeah. Just longer, right? Yeah. But James is that guy, okay? So he's that guy.
He's that guy.
He's not that yeah, he's the guy we all want to be cool like. That's James. Okay, why don't we also just recently got married.
Yes.
And just recently got married.
Yes.
So all these other fun updates. So, yeah. All right. Let me start with James, and we'll go this direction about the stuff that you prepared to talk to us about.
Chris, you were right about the position.
Yeah. I was going to be first in line.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of make a list and go down somewhat in order of importance. But the first two things I wanted to say about were two arenas at Baylor in which I learned the most, and then I'll talk about some specifics. But the two arenas at Baylor that I learned the most One arena was in personal relationships with professors. And I can't understate how formative those relationships were with Dr. Bradley, Dr. Music, my piano teacher, Mrs. Eva Kirk, and Mr. Powers, my French horn teacher, Dr. Gackle, Dr. York. I mean, so many professors that I got to know on a personal level, and seeing them teach, seeing them lead, that is one arena in which I learned so much. The other arena in which I learned so much was getting to serve on staff at First Baptist Marlin when I was here at Baylor. And that wasn't necessarily something I did in school, but it was completely connected. I wouldn't have got that job if I wasn't here at Baylor. And everything I learned while I was here, I got to practice. And everything I had questions about at church, I could ask questions of my professors. And it was extremely helpful. So those are two arenas that were so formative to me, where I learned so much while I was at Baylor. So some specific things that I learned at Baylor that have been helpful to me in my ministry and further study. I learned about a variety of worship styles. And I already enjoyed a variety of music. I already had been involved in a variety of worship contexts, but Baylor just broadened that even more. Some examples, I got to learn a lot of global music. We did some Pablo Sosa songs. I had to play guitar on when we went to Argentina, and learn those and still remember those. I've used those sometimes teaching the kids or worship services. Sometimes we did arrangements of kind of high church-esque music that you don't always get to do depending on your context of worship. With, so many fabulous organists playing worship services here, and just getting to hear that type of playing in worship. Getting to experience doing folk music and Bezé and different elements from liturgy, hymns, modern songs, all together. Just learning about those songs and how to use those songs in worship was extremely helpful. Some things I learned at Baylor helped prepare me for graduate school, such as music history. I actually really enjoyed writing papers. That's kind of weird. But I would say that it was whenever I put forth effort into my papers and picked a topic that I'm interested in, I still remember those things. And sometimes those things just come up in conversation that I studied about. Like I wrote a research paper in undergraduate, I wrote a research paper on John Rutter. And I wrote a research paper about the church music composers of the 17th century. And that was really helpful for me for grad school. It was also just helpful for me to learn about history and contexts and things like that. Also, music theory, I was able to be a graduate assistant, and that was great experience for me. And I also got a stipend for that. And it was great that I had some really awesome theory professors at Baylor that prepared me for that. Some nuts and bolts kind of things that I learned at Baylor. I always remember where I learned these things, such as how to run a meeting. And Dr. Bradley was great at running meetings, and he always made sure whoever was men's choir president was prepared, had an agenda, and we went through the agenda, and meetings sometimes are not fun. And when you're in ministry, you have to do a lot of meetings, but when you can be in charge and set the agenda and stick to it, everybody is really appreciative. And so I always remember, though, when I think about meetings, and I have a room set with chairs are set up, the pencils are there, the agenda set, I always remember men's choir meetings and meetings with Dr. Bradley. Some other things, vocal lessons. I wasn't a voice major. I took from a grad student who was great, Baron Rice, and I still use my vocal warm-ups every Sunday before I lead worship. I do the same warm-ups I did then. I've been doing them now. I guess it's 5 years now, but I still do them. They're still helpful. I teach them whenever I teach. Sometimes I work with individuals in my choir at church, or right now I'm teaching voice to a freshman in college. She wants to study voice, and has never taken voice lessons before, so I kind of am using what I know to help teach her. And I mean, I didn't study voice growing up until college, and so everything I learned here, I mean, that's where I learned it all about voice. Children's choir was a great class that we took with Dr. Bradley. I learned a lot of things about how to get down on the kids' level, how to use fourth instruments. And I hope if you haven't been involved in children's choir yet, in your local context, that you would look for a way to get involved with it, because it is hard work, but it is extremely rewarding. And things like teaching instruments and teaching songs, things like that we did here, I've used and have been great. Music ministry administration. We still have that class or something like it?
Leadership in
Leadership.
ministries.
Was a great class that I learned a lot. That all of the life stages you have to go through in ministry are in Dr. Bradley's book that we used, Postlude to Prelude. And whenever I've had two, since I graduated from Baylor, I've had two transitions to new ministry jobs. And the process of applying for a job, the process of leaving your ministry well, maintaining relationships well, the process of starting in a new place and getting acquainted with your new church, working with the staff, all those things we talked about in that class have been very helpful to me in making, I think I had a great time serving at the church I was at in Fort Worth, and I had a great start in my church in Farmersville, and am grateful for those life lessons, real practical staff job lessons that I learned in that class. Two last things I'll say. I learned a lot about how to rehearse a choir or any ensemble at Baylor. Biggest thing was like rehearsal pace. Watching my conductors, Dr. Gackle, Dr. Bradley, work with the choir and give specific comments. Who has had Dr. Gackle in choir? And to see her work with, like, when she works with the sopranos or tenors, because she can sing every voice part. And just seeing how she works on a difficult passage and makes it so easy. Those are things I still don't know exactly how to do it. I mean, obviously I can't do it like her, but learning from watching my conductors was so helpful to me in running choir rehearsals. And last thing is kind of a life lesson. I started to learn how to balance life while I was at Baylor. And I'm still learning that. And I think that you all know how important that is, of how to balance, how to say no to things, how to say yes to things, when to do that. That's something that is a continual lesson, but I started to learn that at Baylor, and I'm grateful for all the opportunities I had and the way that I started to learn that important lesson. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be with you, and thank you, Dr. Bradley, Dr. Music, Dr. Williams. There's a handout. I had to write and organize to get my thoughts to make any sense to me, so I thought, hey, I'll put them on paper for you, and hopefully maybe something there's useful. But what I learned at Baylor that's been valuable in ministry, as I started to organize my thoughts, upon hearing this topic, I first thought, well, that shouldn't be too hard, because I sure learned a whole lot. And then when I sat down to process through it, it proved a little bit harder to really organize and put into words those things that I learned. And I realized as I was thinking through so much of what I learned in my time at Baylor, it was foundation that I've built on since then. So I really had to kind of peel back the layers and see. And I went back and read some of my papers even and saw how I've grown on top of the things that I learned there. So I'm obviously very grateful for that foundation, and some of it's more philosophical and some of it's more practical. So I divided it into 4 categories just to help me. Skills is the first one. writing skills, speaking, and then of course you think of musical things, conducting, vocal, instrumental. And I would just encourage you, now is the time to refine skills that you will use for the rest of your life. And those kind of words were spoken to me, and I believed them then, and they're even more true in my life now. And so when you find yourself in this place where you have time specifically devoted to refining your skills, make the most of it, would be my encouragement to you. One of the things, I came to Baylor expecting to grow musically, and probably also in communication, but that was one that I really grew a lot in, especially grad school, was writing papers. I'm more of a math science type thinking person, and so I never got to the point of really enjoying writing papers, but I got a lot closer to that, especially when I could write them about things that I was interested in, and I certainly saw the benefit and still see the benefit of processing through things that I'm reading, things that I'm learning, and being able to articulate that. And that plays itself out. I don't write research papers anymore as worship pastor at First Baptist Salado, but I'm constantly writing things and teaching on the things that I've written about before. We have a church newsletter that goes out every month. I write an article in that. And at the two churches that I served, I actually served at First Baptist Clifton before Chris. I was there for 4 years and have been in Salado for 3 years. In both places, I kind of became a person that people look to edit things. And
They call you the professor.
yes, yeah. My nickname in Clifton was the professor. And a lot of that has to do with training and those kind of things. So just, that'd be my encouragement to you is invest all you can in growing in your skills, especially during this time. Relationships. You've probably heard these things before, but both, as James said, relationships with professors that continue on. I've learned so much from them, and then also from peers, those that we were studying with when we were here. And another piece of advice that I heard was going to conferences. Then I remember one of my professors specifically said, the number one reason you go to a conference is to cultivate relationships. Now certainly you want to go to a conference and you want to learn things and you want to, but the unseen thing really is that you strengthen those relationships, you cultivate those relationships, and you have a time to get away from your ministry. And I understand that even more now the more I've been to and been able to do that. Another great opportunity to cultivate relationships is through organizations. I'm a part of the Singing Men of Texas. When I graduated Baylor and had my first full-time job in Clifton, the person that had been there before me had moved out of state, and we didn't talk much. Really, the only piece of advice that I remember him giving me was, I strongly encourage you to join the Singing Men of Texas. And I'm so grateful that he did that because it's just a wonderful resource. And there are other groups like that. There are singing women groups, and then in other denominations, I'm sure there are also similar kind of things where you can. The Singing Men has a concert and a meeting once a month, and those are just special times to get with people who do what you do and understand, what you do and what you deal with. It's great encouragement, inspiration, ideas. There's an email list, and people are always sending emails saying, "Hey, what's a good anthem?" Or "Does anybody have this? Can I borrow this?" Just all sorts of practical things, as well as emotional and encouraging things like that. The next section there, philosophy. I grew by leaps and bounds in my understanding of worship. And of course I use that every week, every day in planning and leading worship. Just some things that were significant. A high priority on congregational singing was sort of taught and became ingrained in me, and that has affected how I plan and lead worship ever since. Intergenerational worship. I was blessed to grow up in a church where I had older people that invested in me. And so I've always kind of really sought relationships with senior adults and been blessed by that in the church. And I think that's something in our society. There's so many ways in which we segregate ourselves by generations, and I really long to see the church be a place where we come together and we learn from one another, and certainly in worship, that's a great place for that to happen. And so one of the papers that I wrote while I was in school was about that, and so it really helped me think through my thoughts on that and be able to articulate it, and that's been something I've taken with me, certainly. If Dr. Terry York talks about dynamic tensions in worship, or these contrasting elements, and that's also been a big part of my planning. Things like mystery and revelation, the fact that God is transcendent and immanent. Things like structure and spontaneity, these things that we need to have balance. And so, and if you look at a song, personal, a song that's sung to God, a song that's sung about God, proclamation versus, those kind of things. So all those kinds of things. And then hymns and hymn stories. Just I grew up singing hymns and enjoyed them, but like James was saying, learning so many more hymns. I got to work for Dr. Music when he was preparing the Celebrating Grace hymnal, and got to see and experience more and more hymns. And the stories behind them I found on Sunday nights lots of times. I can share those, and any time I can share those. Those really help connect with the congregation. And particularly, I've learned that some of the great hymns are born out of suffering. You probably may be familiar with It Is Well With My Soul. Other songs, the hymns by William Cooper. One of the classes that was kind of outside church music for grad students was research methods. But I was able to even still make good use of the paper I had to write for that class. I wrote about the hymns of William Cooper and how he struggled with depression, really almost mental illness, but wrote some great hymns about faith in God in the midst of his struggles. So anyway, that was useful. And then last, just some quick words of advice. And most of these probably come from Dr. Bradley's book, and probably heard him say as well. As James said, I mean, that book is just a wonderful resource. I've definitely experienced the importance of asking qualified individuals to use their gifts rather than just calling for volunteers. If you need someone to pick up trash, you say, come on, guys, let's pick up the trash. But if you need a sound person, then you don't just say, would anybody like to try being a sound person? Run sound boards on Sunday mornings. You find someone with a good ear, you talk to other people who, can you think of somebody who might be good at this, and those kinds of things. So that was a lesson that I use. Obviously, learn to work with a team, run a meeting, those kind of things. Dr. Bradley's great at that. And I've had a choir leadership team, both the choirs that I've had at the two churches I've served, and that's been a huge benefit. If you lead a choir, I encourage you to do something like that. Dealing with transition, James mentioned. Emphasize people and ministry, not programs and events. I looked back and remembered, for one of my classes, read a book called Simple Church, and it was about how the church, the first part of it was about how the church can get so involved in our programs that we forget about people. And even in a small church, it's easy for that to happen, just to keep the wheel spinning. And so that would be my encouragement to you, is keep the main thing the main thing. Understand all aspects of your compensation, of taxes. Dr. Bradley covers that in the book wonderfully. But I would just encourage you take responsibility. Don't just assume that your paycheck is coming correctly, that everything, make sure you understand and being taxes as it relates to a minister, especially if you have a housing allowance, those things are not simple, but if you have a college degree, you can understand it if you take it. And so I encourage you to do that. It could save you from a lot of frustration. And so I strongly encourage you to do that. Insurance, retirement, all those things, one of these days you'll deal with if you don't already. And lastly, I said never stop learning. You've heard that before, I'm sure, but it's true. This little quote at the end is from a book on the back. There, I put some of the books I read while I was at Baylor and some books I've read recently related to worship. And one of those on here is Doxology and Theology. This book was, different worship leaders wrote a chapter in this book. Matt Boswell's name is on it first. He wrote 2 or 3 chapters, but other worship leaders wrote these chapters. And this quote just really jumped out at me. I was reading it with I have a youth intern that leads worship, and I've been trying to kind of disciple him, and he and I have been actually read through this book together. And this quote just jumped out at me when I thought about speaking to y'all. He actually said, my prayer for you, the reader of this book, is that you love God more than the role you've been given, and love the people of God more than the music you create. And if I can leave one thing with you, that would be it.
Well, it is an honor to be on this panel with you guys, friends, and thank you, Dr. Bradley, Dr. Eagle. Things that I've learned that have been most valuable to me in my ministry. If you are here as a music major at Baylor, you're an excellent musician. You just don't get into the Baylor School of Music if you're not a good musician. So our job as ministers is to translate excellence in music and love of God into our congregations and into our choirs. And learning how to do that in a way that you come across as sharing instead of I have all the power and all the knowledge is a skill that you learn here, and something that will help you build relationships. One of the things that Dr. Bradley said is you must love people first, and they must know that you love them before they will sing for you. And that's something unique that I hope all of us have experienced during choir. I could just bounce on everything that my friend said. That here are a couple things that I thought of. How to plan and dream ideas into existence. As worship leaders, we do that on a weekly basis. Taking an idea, usually a sermon theme, and dreaming that how can I be creative with this particular text? How can we use the story of Zacchaeus in our context here? I worked in the church music office here, and we did that on a routine basis, and Dr. Bradley gave his team freedom to dream things into existence, and then those became our responsibilities. Doing that, I learned how to take baby steps toward that goal. So if this is where we're going, okay, then taking back all the steps to, okay, what is the first baby step we need to take? What is the second baby step? And when you know where you're going, each one of those steps is really satisfying. When Ken Miedema was here, he said, my 6 favorite words are, what would it be like if? So when you're leading these meetings and you're leading them well, having the ideas come from your team and helping them envision what could it be like if we had, okay, then what would that be like if we had such and such? And then having them jump on that conversation helps, I believe, the voice of God to emerge from that meeting, from the people of God, into neat ministries that God has for that church. Of course, intergenerational worship, we can't be segregated. The kingdom of God is not segregated. Broad congregational song exposure. My wife hates it when I listen to Caleb with her in the car, because I pick apart the theology of the songs. I pick apart the melody. No congregation can sing that at 8:30 in the morning. And then the theology of the songs. What does this song say to someone who's suffering? What does this song say to someone? Because on every pew, there's a broken heart. And we as ministers have to be sensitive to that. It is not always praise. Sometimes our worship services need to be places of lament and a safe place to be real. And we as ministers have the ability to do that through reading of the Psalms and sharing of testimonies. Getting to know your congregation is a library of stories. And I believe that each one of our stories is a God story. And so when we hear someone else's God story, it is our job to create a relationship and to share that God story, because God's the one that gets the credit for that. One of the things that Dr. York said, I believe Dr. York is a parable teller. And one of the things he said is to be where you are at, to fully invest in the people that you are serving. God calls us to unique places. And if we look for the next best church, the next biggest thing, or I wish that my church had this, you're telling the people in front of you, you aren't good enough for me. And we are servants. So we must trust God. That God, I trust you, so I trust you to put me wherever you want me to be. And I'm going to stay there as long as you want me to be. And then we must trust God to move us on. As James and Austin have said, I've been through transitions. I believe that God led you in each one of those transitions, right? So we can't be looking for the next best thing. A philosophy of children in worship. Children, anytime you use the words like or as, and I hear it in lots of children's messages, anytime you use those two words, it goes right over their heads. When I was a kid, we would sing the song deep and wide, there's a fountain flowing deep and wide. Well, when I was a kid, I thought we were singing about the big fountain on the church lawn. Because it didn't make any sense to me. So we as ministers have to find places to dial it down. Who made the stars? God made the stars. The stars aren't like something. God made the stars. And children are not meant to be cute. I get so angry when I hear someone mention something like that. Children can be worship leaders. Children can teach songs to the congregation. Children disarm adults, and they are unexpected to be anything more than cute. But when a child shares, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that says something really special. Coming from a 5 or 6 year old. Equally, if that comes from someone who is 95 years old, who has been through the ups and downs of life, and can still say, God loves me. That intergenerational, and that way that we have the ability as worship leaders to bring the community of God together in our place is a really, really powerful thing. I learned how to function amid church gossip and conflict. You laugh. You laugh. It's real. It's there because we're people. When you have someone that comes up to you and says, could you tell so-and-so that I really don't like that? Or they'll come more often or not, they'll come to you and want to complain about so-and-so over there. And then expect you to go address so-and-so over there. What you learn here is how to say, well, have you talked to so-and-so over there? You haven't. Well, before I hear it, I think you should really go talk to them. And then they won't. But you are no longer in the middle. And you as a congregational staff person can't get in the middle of little feuds like that. Putting up boundaries. I use the phrase often, I'm willing to do everything up to this point. But after this point, I'm really, really sorry. And that way, you are able to maintain your identity as a minister. You're able to maintain your sanity. Like James was talking about balance. I'm willing to stay till 5:15 today for you to come and show up and pick up music. But after that, I'm really sorry, I have an appointment. And that appointment could be being on your couch watching Netflix. I am serious. If you don't take care of yourself, the church will take care of you. You've got to take care of yourself. Cross-cultural interaction. I went to Argentina with James, went to Kenya with Dr. Bradley. I actually lived in Kenya for about 10 months, doing a wide matter of tasks. But the cross-cultural interaction that you learn is very useful in ministry. And when you learn that in a different culture, because whether you like it or not, you're going to be interacting with people of a different culture of different ages, from different parts of the country, from different socioeconomic areas. So if you have the ability to, what is our common ground that we can share? Where's a place that we can meet on the same plane? So I'm not the rich white Wazungu with all the power, but I can be a brother or sister in Christ, and we can meet here, and then we can find a solution together. That goes a long way. So for example, our choir is going to go to the Gatesville prison to display our Christmas cantata. Well, that's a completely different context. So instead of being the free people and the people that are captive, well, we're going to teach the choir the cantata. So now there's a choir of inmates out there that are learning the cantata, and they're no longer inmates, but they're sopranos and altos. And for an hour during our rehearsal, they are the same. And we are brothers and sisters in Christ. So those are a couple thoughts that I have.
What kind of questions would you like to pose to this wonderful panel? Josh.
Okay. So James, no, I'm so sorry, Austin. So from the handout, you said emphasize people in ministry, not programs and events. That's not clicking. Could you possibly give some example? What's the difference between focusing ministry and focusing programs?
Programs is getting, in my mind, getting bogged down in the details of things. Doing things the same way every year because we've always done it this way. Not stopping to ask, why do we do this way? And is that the best way to reach people? Does it have an impact, or has this ritual lost its meaning? Do we need to revive it in some way, or are we just keeping the wheel spinning? Does that make sense?
Kat.
I have a question for Chris. I really like what you were saying about like your wife hating writing the barbecue besides the songs.
She would not agree.
I understand where you're coming from with like the, how would this affect my congregation? How does this affect the broken hearts out there? But a lot of what we're taught is that praise through music, like worship, is all about God. And it's all about simply just taking the time to adore Him and praise Him for who He is. So how do you incorporate those broken hearts with simply praising God?
You do both. You have a time in the service where absolutely we praise God, but that's not the whole service. Dr. Bradley talks in his worship book, the Isaiah 6 model, where we adore and then we confess. And then then we return back to God. If we just have a whole service of nothing but praise, what does that say to those who are hurting?
This is a question for all three of y'all. If while in school, if y'all had a church, if y'all served in a church while in school, how do you balance getting the most out of school while also being present and getting the most out of the church that you're serving in as well? Or do you have any advice or anything like that?
I would say, obviously give all that you can, but do your best to find ways to connect the two. I mean, like James was talking about, you know, sometimes you may even be able to do some sort of project in class, you know, work that out in your church, and I think that would be a big key, would just be ways to bring those two together. You know, if you're singing with a cappella choir or something, invite some of your choir members to come to a concert, and you know, just things like that. Just bring those two together.
Yeah, that is a hard question, Zach, and it's hard to balance. I think a couple things is there are clear times when you can give to church. Like Wednesday night, I always made sure I didn't have any conflicts, and even like organizationally, I was involved in a lot of things on campus. People just knew James is at church, and I was in a fraternity. I was in multiple ensembles. I was in marching band. I would go to Marlin in my like shorts for marching band practice on Wednesday at 6, and I had to eat, you know, Sonic, and it was hard, but I made sure I got there.
You got that
So-
routine.
And then Sundays, you know, I spent most of the day there. So I tried to do my homework on Saturday so that I could spend most of the day on Sunday, you know, at church with people. The other thing was I really spent summers and breaks a lot at church with people. I stayed the night with people a lot, I spent time with my pastor. And the summer, I worked a lot more. I did some special programs and things like that that were helpful. And the other thing is kind of piggybacking on what Austin said about inviting people to concerts and things like that. Also, I sometimes used my friends from school to help me out at church, and that was awesome. Every Christmas, probably had 3 or 4 friends sing in our Christmas program, and I had an orchestra that was like 8 Baylor students. And there was no way the church would have had an orchestra apart from that, but I even ended up having, at one point in time, 4 friends that would come to church with me just because they liked being involved in the small church. Instead of just going to church and not doing anything, they enjoyed playing sometimes at our church and things like that. So I just asked friends, hey, you can come to church with me, and I'll write a sax part for you or whatever. So that was helpful and fun, I thought.
James started at Marlin the summer before he came to Baylor, actually, which is very an interesting deal. James is is a fine pianist and obviously did a recital in piano, but he's also a fine horn player. He's on one of the men's choir recordings.
Same as you.
I would say find ways to get Baylor to your church. So when I was at Robinson, Dr. Bradley came to my church and was my mentor in choir rehearsal. I gave my graduate recital at church. I just shared with the church for a Sunday night thing. And that way, that helps the congregation see me in a different light. Another thing I would encourage you to do is know your limits. The church will take and take and take and take and take if you let it. So being able to say, I would really love to be there on Tuesday mornings, but I'm really sorry, but I have commitments. I have Baylor to take care of, I have my schooling. And then know your job description. Know what part of your description is absolutely necessary. And if, you know, cleaning the bathrooms is not part of your description, don't do it. Find somebody else to do that, because you are part-time, and so I have 20 hours a week to do whatever task is in my description, and I'm held accountable for that. And I will do extra things when I can, but I must do this here. There's a great book called Boundaries. Highly recommend.
Reading that right now, actually.
Awesome. It saved my life.
Other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm curious about how, for your sense of call and discernment of direction in ministry has kind of grown and been shaped since school. I'm currently in the MDiv MM program, and in that kind of process of thinking, okay, over these next 5-10 years of my life, what kind of direction do I sense in terms of what God is leading me to? And I'm curious to see what that continued process is like from the other side of that.
That's a great question. My sense of calling was always very firm, and then I knew God was calling me to music ministry and ministry in the church. So I feel blessed in that regard, because even in seminary you have multiple options before you of teaching or pastoral or music, etc. But the way that changed for me over the course of time, when I came into Baylor, I was more interested in leading worship and Sunday services, worship playing, kind of stuff like that. I had played guitar, and I really liked that, and I knew that part of my calling. But I discovered the part of my calling that involved ministries like choir. I had never directed a choir before. I love directing a choir now. No matter if it's very traditional music or very contemporary music, I love directing a choir now. I find it extremely valuable. I discovered that part of my calling while at Baylor. And things like working with children and working with youth were parts of my calling that I think God just awakened in me while I was at Baylor. And so I'm still, and it's even changed some since then. When I was in grad school, I kind of felt a little bit of a tug towards teaching some. I taught a little bit of, I was a teaching assistant. I might do that later in life. Who knows what God's going to do with that later. But now, I feel blessed because I'm getting to do full-time ministry, and that's what I was working for 7 years. But it changed a little bit along the way, and God led me clearly. I'm thankful for that.
I would say for me that I never had a thus saith the Lord moment. And that was really hard because I would hear colleagues that would say, I've always known. And for me, it was a step of faith in the confirmation. A step of faith in the confirmation. And I still can see, I can still see that. Sometimes an odd idea may flip through, and I think that it's odd when I think about it, and then there's momentum on that idea. So, does that make sense?
Yep.
What was your darkest moment at Baylor, and how did you get through it?
I'll take this one. So, I still remember the day. I was taking Dr. Non's class. I was taking Dr. Non.
Amen.
I was taking Dr. Music's hymnology class, his graduate research course. I was taking Turning Points in Church Music, and all three, both of those classes together are heavy writing classes. And Dr. Non's class is just crazy hard. And I was taking piano lessons and doing a whole lot of other stuff. And I went in Dr. Bradley's office and I said, I can't do men's choir. I need something to give. And I think in that semester I learned through a lot of work what it is to love God with my mind. We talk a lot about loving God with our hearts and our soul, but loving God with one's mind is really hard, but it is also a true gift. And I remember finishing the semester and walking around going, wow, there's one point I thought I was just going to flunk out of Baylor. And now look at how I've been carried through.
For me, it's hard to think of a specific moment, but certainly that first semester of grad school, writing more papers than I ever dreamed I would want to write, reading books that you have to read every sentence 2 or 3 times, like Music Through the Eyes of Faith by Harold Best, and you're like, man, this is really good, but I don't think I have time to read it 3 times. I don't understand it, but you figure out how to make it work, and that first semester in general, and the joys of classes like research methods, but the sense of calling, going back to God has me here for a reason, and then friends and family. I was married at the time, so the encouragement of my wife, and I would say that's kind of what helped get me through it. And hope for the future, and now looking back, it was well worth it.
I'll give a short answer because I'm kind of I bounce back usually quickly, thankfully. So I think a hard time for me was when I was very busy my sophomore year, and I was in men's choir, fraternity, band, courtside players, minister of music, piano lessons. French horn lessons. It was at least two too many things. So that was hard, and I just had to, really I just had to talk to people and get wisdom about what was most important. And then I said no to a few things, and the next semester was a lot better.
Chris, I don't think said that he also studied with Jane Allen, so both of them did piano recitals with some of you. She's the teacher for some of you, so to make that connection. Another question?
Question?
Yes.
How do you give attention to your own self-care and spiritual formation?
Now as a minister, or?
Yeah, now in ministry.
Go ahead.
All right. The most important thing I think for me is my daily quiet time, and that is a habit you can never lose. And sometimes you need to reinvigorate it with more of something, more prayer, more scripture memory, something fasting. And the other thing that has been really great for me now, I do in my life, is I go running with my wife. I never did that. I never was a runner in college. Bear Trail did it twice. But I run a lot now. And that is a great time for me and my wife, and it helps me keep everything balanced.
Yeah. Having those times to get away, small ones, large ones, those kind of things. Like James said, you're maintaining your personal relationship with God outside of your ministry, studying the Bible besides not anything related to planning worship, prayer, and those kind of disciplines, obviously. And then, like I said, things like the Singing Men of Texas, getting together with other ministers to talk about ministry and also just life. Just those kind of things are helpful to me.
Over breakfast, my wife and I do a devotional together, and just getting into a ritual. This is what we do. Of course, Bible prayer time. I think also having times of, this is where I'm going to be still. And in our world where we're bombarded by Facebook and email and all of these commitments, having a time just to rest, and not sleep, but just to rest. I really enjoyed centering prayer, which is just kind of all right, God, I just submit myself to you. I trust you, and I just submit all of myself to you. And just resting in the love of God for a few minutes.
Joe?
Hey, so all three of y'all are ministers right now, and one of the, obviously one of the most important things about that is ministering to people. But who are some of the people in your lives that then minister to you? And if you could, say why it's really important that they're there for them to minister to you in your life and the impact that that's having you in your ministry.
It's always good to have someone that is outside of the context to be in your corner just for you. To be able to voice frustrations, to voice concerns about your family. There are things in ministry that you just can't share with your church. And there are things that they don't need to know. That there are conflicts at home. There are situations that could lead to more gossip. But having mentors like when I was in Kenya, I filled up Dr. Brown's email box, all sorts of stuff, and then other friends that are. You always need to be in a place where you are being mentored and mentoring somebody else. So, kind of in the middle there. Does that answer your question?
It's going to sound like a broken record, but people who do what you do at other places. Chris and I are blessed because, I was where he's serving the church that I served previously, so it's easy for us to find things to talk about. Yeah, but and sometimes, I think hopefully I'm helpful to him in that way, and he's always willing to listen to me share about anything, joys and struggles, so it's huge.
No, you're not alone.
But, and I would say, you know, within the church, there are people that you can talk to about different things, so you don't want to have a mentality of,
That's right.
you know, well, I can't ever really open up to people because I work at church and they, you know, so there's a balance there too.
Yeah.
And hopefully, depending on the size of your pastoral staff and how you relate to them, hopefully, you know, your fellow pastors can be those people to you in some ways as well.
Yeah, there have been my friends that are in ministry. I have two friends that are not in music ministry that I talk to the most, but they're in other places I've talked to a lot. But like Austin said, there should be someone in your church. I sure hope and pray for there to be someone that is a member of your church, but they're just in your corner. They want to hang out with you. They want to talk to you. They want to be your family. If you're far away from your family, I'm far away from my family. My wife is from Canada. We're way far away from her family, and we have a couple that they just adopted us, and we can talk to them. And if we haven't seen them in a week or two, they invite us out to dinner, and so seek out those people and pray for them. It's a blessing that God will send you.
Great. The last question. Yes, Dave.
With coming out on the other end of a Baylor education, leaving with a degree, what are some things that you've found that have been most useful here at Baylor that churches have seen, in your experience here that has helped you in job searches and ministry, leaving here and trying to find a first ministry job?
I'd say two things. One, it would be just that I study church music and religion, and so knowing that I had expertise. The other that has been really helpful was actually my internship, which would not have happened without Baylor, and so. It doesn't even matter really what I did, but I was at First Baptist Nashville, and that experience and people seeing that was really helpful. And it was very personally beneficial to me too, but it's helped me in job searches.
I would say just there's certainly respect and if people see that you have a degree from Baylor. And an expectation that you study and know what you're talking about.
I think I would echo that. Coming from Baylor, you don't get in easily, and you certainly don't get out. As to, and having your teachers as references, each one of your teachers know you, and they can speak to your gifts and your talents and how they can envision you into the place that you're going to be applying to, and they can vouch for you in situations where there may be some questions.
I would say that's something that gives me a lot of confidence, is when I can put on a resume people that I know me, have seen me work, and I know that I would rather a church almost, I'm comfortable with a church talking to them and know that they can say all the good things about me and the things that I will struggle with, because that goes a long ways too. I mean, if a church contacts one of my references and all they say is, oh, he's wonderful, then they're going to go, okay, well, he must be his best friend, If they can say good things about me, but also be honest and say, this is what he struggles with, then I think in the long run, if I end up going there, it certainly helps, And it probably gives them a better feeling, So I would say having those relationships and being able to put them down as references gives me confidence.
Right.
Are you listening?
Okay. All right, what a great session today. This was helpful for me. As we depart, as I've looked around the room today, I'm imagining you all in these seats and you all being here telling your story. And that gives all of us, I think, great hope. I think as you've looked around the room, I hope today that you're imagining, that you'll have colleagues who can sit and talk about what is and what has been, and do it with great joy. And that you'll be glad for what you've done. The work that you've accomplished will be something that you're proud of, and it'll be something that you value, and it'll be work that you can have seen the purpose for, and that you can see a God thread flowing through all of it and weaving it all together in a tapestry that's beyond your imagination. That's what I've seen in you guys today, and thank you very much for sharing this. It's been really, really rich. Thank you. All right. Get to know these guys, speak to them. That's part of what they told you that is important, right? So, may the future begin.